The rain fell in steady sheets over the city, turning sidewalks into shallow rivers and streetlights into hazy golden halos. It was one of those late autumn evenings where the cold didn't just nip at your skin. It seeped in bone deep, making even the busiest people hurry with their collars turned up and hands jammed in pockets. Outside a sleek downtown steakhouse with dark wood panels and glowing amber windows, most folks rushed past without a second glance at the woman standing just beyond the awning. She wasn't begging. Not exactly. She stood quietly, shoulders slightly hunched against the damp, her coat thin but neatly buttoned. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tucked under a faded scarf, and her hands, chapped but clean, held a small grocery bag that had seen better days. She watched the door, not with desperation but with a kind of patient hope. Every so often someone would exit with a doggy bag or leftovers, and if they looked approachable, she'd ask softly, "Excuse me. May I have your extras, sir, or ma'am? Anything you didn't finish?" Most people shook their heads or pretended not to hear. A few muttered sorry without making eye contact. One man even stepped sideways to avoid her as if kindness might slow him down. But she didn't flinch. She'd been through worse. Much worse. Inside the restaurant, a man sat alone at a corner table near the window. He wore a tailored suit, but his tie was loosened, and his eyes held that familiar hollow look of someone who's climbed to the top only to realize the view feels strangely empty. He'd just wrapped up a tense board meeting, another round of decisions that moved millions but left him feeling like a ghost in his own life. The food on his plate was barely touched. A thick fillet, roasted vegetables, a baked potato smothered in butter and chives. He wasn't hungry. He hadn't really been hungry in months, not since his mother passed. She'd been the one person who never cared about his bank account, only whether he was sleeping enough or remembering to call his old friends. Now, the silence at home was louder than any boardroom argument. He paid the bill without looking at the total, left a generous tip, habit not feeling, and stood to leave. As he stepped out into the cool, wet night, the automatic doors hissed shut behind him, sealing off the warmth and low hum of conversation. That's when he saw her. She didn't lunge forward or raise her voice. She simply turned slightly as if sensing his presence and met his eyes. There was no shame in her gaze, no performative sadness, just quiet dignity, like someone who'd lost a lot but refused to lose herself. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice calm, steady despite the chill. "May I have your extras?" "Anything you didn't finish?" He froze. Not because he was annoyed, though part of him expected to be, but because something about the way she asked caught him off guard. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even really a plea. It was a question, offered with the same respect you'd use asking for the time. He glanced back at the restaurant, then down at the takeout container the hostess had handed him. Still warm, still full. He could have tossed it in the nearest bin without a thought. He'd done it before. But tonight something stopped him. He looked at her again. Really looked. Noticed the careful way she held herself. The slight tremor in her fingers she tried to hide by tucking them into her sleeves. The way her eyes stayed level with his, not darting away in embarrassment. "You're out here every night?" he asked, surprising himself. She gave a small nod. "Not every night. Only when it's quiet enough to ask without bothering folks. You live nearby?" She hesitated, then offered a half smile. Near enough, he didn't press. Something told him she wouldn't lie, but she also wouldn't spill her whole story to a stranger in a suit. And maybe that's what made him pause. In his world, everyone wanted something. Investments, introductions, favors. But this woman, she just wanted leftovers. Not even money. Just food that would have been thrown away. Without thinking too hard, he held out the container. "Here, it's all yours." She reached for it slowly, as if making sure it was really okay. "Thank you, sir. Truly." But then instead of walking away, he found himself saying, "Wait." She stopped, eyes questioning. "There's a cafe just down the block, still open. They've got hot tea, decent soup. I was about to grab a coffee. You're welcome to join me, if you'd like." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words against a lifetime of caution. Then quietly, "You don't owe me anything." "I know," he said. "But I'd like the company." That seemed to surprise her. After another beat, she nodded. "All right. Just for a few minutes." They walked side by side, not speaking, the rain softening to a mist. The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and old books. They took a small table by the window. He ordered 2 hot teas and a bowl of vegetable soup. "For you," he said before she could protest. As steam curled from her cup, she finally relaxed, just a little. Her hands wrapped around the mug like it was a lifeline. You didn't have to do this, she said. Maybe not, he replied, but I'm glad I did. She looked out the window, then back at him. Most people don't even see me. I saw you, he said simply. And in that moment something shifted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but like the first crack of ice on a frozen pond. Two people, worlds apart in circumstance but closer than they knew in loneliness, sat in the quiet hum of a rainy night, sharing warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. He didn't know her name yet. She didn't know his. But for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt quite so invisible. Outside, the city kept rushing by, headlights streaking through puddles, people hurrying home to lives full of noise and distraction. But inside that little cafe, time slowed, and in the space between sips of tea and the soft clink of spoons, a miracle began. Not with lightning or headlines, but with a single question asked in the rain, and a choice to answer with kindness instead of walking away. He would learn later that she'd once stood in front of classrooms for 30 years, teaching kids to read, to dream, to believe they mattered, that she'd buried her husband after a long illness, then lost her home when the medical bills swallowed everything, that she slept in a shelter most nights but still made sure her coat was clean and her words were kind. And she would learn that he'd grown up bouncing between foster homes, eating meals from soup kitchens not unlike the one she now avoided out of pride, that his success hadn't erased the ache of feeling unwanted as a child, that he kept his mother's old reading glasses in his desk drawer because they still smelled like her perfume. But none of that came tonight. Tonight was just tea, just rain, just two human beings choosing, for once, not to look away. When they finally stood to leave, she handed him back the empty soup bowl with a quiet, "Thank you." He didn't offer money, didn't make promises, just said, "If you're out here tomorrow, maybe I'll bring an extra sandwich." She smiled, really smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "I'd like that," she said, and as they stepped back into the misty night, each heading in different directions, neither felt quite as alone as they had before. The miracle hadn't happened yet, not the big one, the life-changing one. But the seed had been planted, and sometimes that's all it takes. The next evening, he showed up at the same spot, right outside the steakhouse just before closing time. This time he wasn't alone. He carried a brown paper bag with 2 thick turkey sandwiches, a thermos of hot soup, and a small container of fruit salad. He'd made it himself early that morning, fumbling with the knife and wondering if the bread was too dry. It felt strange doing something so ordinary after years of having chefs and assistants handle every meal. But it also felt right. She was there, standing a little farther back than before, as if giving him space to change his mind. When she saw him, her eyes widened slightly, not with expectation, but with something softer, like quiet disbelief. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he replied, handing her the bag. "Figured you might prefer a sandwich to steak leftovers." She accepted it with both hands like it was something precious. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said again. "But I wanted to." They stood there for a moment, the city humming around them. Taxis honking, distant laughter from a bar, the rhythmic drip of rainwater from the awning. Then almost shyly she asked, "Are you always this kind?" He laughed a little awkwardly. "Not really, honestly. I've been pretty disconnected lately. Work, travel, meetings that go nowhere. I forgot what it felt like to just talk to someone." She nodded slowly. "It's easy to get lost in all that. I used to grade papers until midnight thinking I was helping, but really I was just avoiding how quiet the house had gotten after my husband passed." He looked at her. Really looked. "You were a teacher?" 32 years, she said, a flicker of pride in her voice. 4th grade. Mostly kids who didn't have much at home. But they had big hearts. Big dreams too, if you gave them a chance. He thought about that. "You must have made a difference." "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe they made a difference in me." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people understand each other without needing to explain everything. Then he surprised himself again. "I've got this project at home. Boxes and boxes of my mother's things, books, letters, old photo albums. I've been meaning to sort through them for over a year, but I keep putting it off. It's overwhelming. She tilted her head. Why? Because once I go through it all, it'll feel like she's really gone, he admitted, voice low. As long as the boxes stay closed, it's like part of her is still waiting for me to come back. She didn't offer empty comfort. No, she's in a better place or time heals. Instead, she said, maybe she's waiting for you to remember her, not just miss her. He blinked. That hit harder than he expected. After a pause, she added, if you ever need help sorting, I've got good eyes and steady hands. And I know how to handle old paper without tearing it. He almost said no. It felt too personal, too vulnerable. But then he remembered how she'd held that soup bowl like it was a gift, how she spoke about her students with warmth, not pity, and something in him trusted her. Would you really? He asked. If you'd like, she said simply. So the next afternoon, he picked her up in a plain sedan. No luxury car, no driver, just him behind the wheel, nervous as a teenager. She climbed in, clutching her grocery bag like a purse, and gave him a small, reassuring smile. His home wasn't what she expected. Not cold or flashy, but warm. Wood floors, shelves full of books, a piano in the corner with sheet music still open. Photos lined the hallway. A young boy with messy hair, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Holidays, birthdays, quiet moments. This is nice, she said. Feels lived in. It used to, he said. Lately it's just empty. They went to the study where 8 cardboard boxes sat stacked against the wall, sealed with yellowing tape. He hadn't opened a single one since the funeral. She rolled up her sleeves. Where do you want to start? He pointed to the smallest box. That one was on her nightstand. She opened it gently. Inside were reading glasses, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a lavender sachet, and a stack of handwritten letters tied with ribbon. She picked up the top letter, glanced at him for permission, and he nodded. Her eyes scanned the page, then softened. She wrote to you every week while you were away at college, she said quietly. Even when you didn't write back. He swallowed hard. I was busy. Thought I'd have more time later. We always think that, she said, not judging, just stating a truth. They worked for hours. She sorted books by genre, letters by date, photos by decade. She didn't rush. Didn't treat it like a chore. She handled each item like it held a memory worth keeping. At one point, she found a photo of him as a boy, grinning with missing teeth, holding a science fair trophy. Look at you, she said, smiling. Proud as could be. He laughed, the sound unfamiliar in his own ears. I thought I'd invented solar power that day. You probably felt like you did. As the afternoon faded into evening, he made tea. They sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of sordid memories. He told her about how his mother used to read to him every night, even when he was too old for it. How she saved every report card, every doodle he'd ever drawn. She told him about her classroom, how she kept a kindness jar where kids dropped notes when someone did something good. How she'd stay late to help a struggling reader, sometimes missing dinner but never regretting it. You gave them your whole heart, he said. They gave me purpose, she replied, even on the hard days. Later, as she prepared to leave, he walked her to the door. You don't have to go back to the shelter tonight, he said carefully. I've got a guest room. It's clean, warm. No strings, she hesitated. I appreciate that truly, but I've learned to be careful. Kindness can sometimes come with expectations. He met her gaze. No expectations. Just a safe place to rest. That's all. She studied him, his face, his posture, the sincerity in his eyes. Then she nodded. Just for tonight. But the next night he offered again. And the next. And slowly, without fanfare, she began staying. He never asked for anything in return. Never made her feel like a burden. He'd leave groceries in the kitchen, turn up the heat before she came in from her evening walk, leave library books on the table she might enjoy. One morning, she found him staring at a box labeled School Projects. Inside were science fair boards, a clay volcano, a diorama of the solar system. You kept all this, she asked. My mom did, he said. Said I might want to show my kids someday. She looked at him. Do you want kids? He sighed. I used to think success meant corner offices and stock options. Now I wonder if it's just having someone to come home to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the box and pulled out a faded report titled, What I Want to Be When I Grow Up. Underneath, in messy kid handwriting, I want to build things that help people. She handed it to him. You still can. That afternoon, she didn't go back to the shelter. She called the community center she'd visited once before, the one with the after-school program, and asked if they needed volunteers. They did, desperately. The next week, she started tutoring 2 afternoons a week. Kids lit up when she walked in. She remembered names, favorite books, who needed extra help with fractions. She brought cookies sometimes, told stories about the old days, made learning feel like an adventure. He dropped by occasionally, just to say hello. The staff assumed he was her son. She never corrected them. He didn't mind. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You've got a gift." She shook her head. "It's not a gift. It's just showing up. Paying attention, letting people know they matter." He thought about that. Then he said, "I've been thinking, what if we did more? Not just you volunteering, but something bigger. A place where kids like yours, kids who fall through the cracks, could get real help. Homework, meals, mentors." She looked at him, eyes sharp but kind. "That sounds expensive." "It is," he admitted. "But I've got more than enough. And if I'm honest, I've been looking for a way to honor my mom." She believed education was the great equalizer. She was quiet for a long time. Then, "If you're serious, I'll help you build it. But it has to be about the kids, not your name on a building." "Deal," he said. And just like that, something new began to grow, not from pity, not from guilt, but from 2 people who'd found each other in the rain and decided to plant something good in the world, but neither of them knew yet that a quiet health scare was waiting in the wings, one that would test everything they'd built and force them to lean on each other in ways they never imagined. For now, though, there was tea on the porch, children's laughter drifting from the community center down the street, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most ordinary acts, sorting old letters, sharing a sandwich, listening without judgment, are the ones that change everything. The days settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected, but both came to rely on. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and toast in the kitchen, the quiet clink of dishes and the soft rustle of newspaper pages. She'd sit at the table with a notebook, planning her lessons for the community center, writing out word games, math puzzles, little stories to help kids remember tricky spelling rules. He'd linger nearby, pretending to check emails, but really just enjoying the normalcy of it all. It had been years since his home felt like a home. At the center, she became a steady presence. Kids started calling her Miss, not out of formality, but respect. She remembered who liked apples over oranges, who got nervous reading aloud, who needed a quiet corner to calm down after a rough morning at home. She never raised her voice. She just listened, and somehow that made them want to do better. He visited often, not to check on her, but because he liked watching her work. There was a light in her eyes when she helped a child sound out a difficult word or finally grasp a math problem. It reminded him of how his mother used to look when she baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, like she was giving them more than food. She was giving them belonging. One afternoon, he brought a box of used books he'd collected from friends and old offices. "Thought these might come in handy," he said, setting them down in the small reading nook she'd started. She flipped through them, smiling. "These are perfect." "Some of these kids have never owned a book. They should," he said simply. Later that week, they sat at the kitchen table again, this time with notebooks and pens spread out between them. They were sketching ideas for what they'd started calling the Learning Corner, a dedicated space inside the center where kids could get homework help, read and just feel safe after school. "We'll need shelves," she said, drawing rough boxes on paper, a big table in the middle, maybe beanbags for reading time, and a fridge, he added, for snacks. "Real food, not just crackers," she nodded, "and a little closet for coats and backpacks. Some of these kids walk miles in the rain." He looked at her. "You remember everything about them." "They're not just students," she said gently. "They're people, with stories." He reached for his phone, opened a banking app, and typed in a number that made her eyes widen. "That's a lot," she said. "It's not enough," he replied. "But it's a start," she didn't argue. She knew better than anyone that pride shouldn't stand in the way of helping children. Instead, she said, "Then let's make it count." Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side, painting walls, building shelves, sorting donations. Volunteers from the neighborhood pitched in when they heard what was happening. A retired carpenter helped hang whiteboards. A local bakery promised to donate day-old bread every Friday. A college student offered to tutor on weekends. The space began to take shape. Not fancy, but warm. Brightly colored posters lined the walls, a rug covered the worn floor, and a shelf labeled "Take One, Leave One" slowly filled with books. On opening day, a dozen kids showed up right after school. They stood in the doorway, unsure, until she knelt down and said, "Come on in. We've been waiting for you." That night back at the house, he made spaghetti, slightly overcooked, but she ate it with genuine enjoyment. "You're getting better," she teased. "I had a good teacher," he said, and she laughed. A real, full laugh that filled the room. But as the weeks passed, he started noticing little things. She'd pause while reading, squinting slightly at the page. Sometimes she'd reach for a book and miss the edge, her fingers brushing air before finding it. Once she poured tea into the sugar bowl by mistake and didn't realize until he gently pointed it out. "You okay?" he asked one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." But he wasn't convinced. A few days later, he called the community health clinic that partnered with the center. He didn't give his name, just said a volunteer might need a checkup and asked if they could fit her in. The nurse agreed. He didn't tell her right away. Instead, he said, "The center's doing a wellness day next week. Free blood pressure checks, flu shots, vision screening. Everyone's doing it. Even the staff." She raised an eyebrow. "Since when does the center do wellness days?" "Since now," he said with a shrug. "Might as well get yours done, too." She studied him, then sighed. "You're worried." "A little," he admitted. She didn't argue. Maybe she'd noticed it, too. The way street signs looked blurry in the morning, how she had to hold her lesson plans closer to her face. But she'd been putting it off. Doctors cost money, and she didn't want to be a burden. The day of the screening, she went quietly. He waited outside in the car, pretending to read, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When she came out, her face was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. She got in the car and stared straight ahead for a long moment. "What did they say?" he asked softly. She took a deep breath. "It's my eyes. Macular degeneration. It's why things have been getting fuzzy. Especially up close." He felt his chest tighten. "Is it treatable?" "Sometimes," she said. "Early stages can be managed. But it's expensive. Injections, special vitamins, regular monitoring. And even then, it might not stop." He didn't say anything for a while. Just started the car and drove. When they got back to the house, he made tea, her favorite chamomile, and sat across from her at the table. "You're not going through this alone," he said. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want your money." "I'm not offering money," he said gently. "I'm offering partnership, remember? We're building something together. That includes taking care of each other." She shook her head. "This is different. This is personal." "So was showing up in the rain with a grocery bag," he said. "So was trusting me enough to stay here. So was teaching those kids like they were your own. This isn't charity. It's care." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I've spent my whole life giving. It's hard to receive." "I know," he said, "but you taught me that kindness isn't weakness. Let me be kind to you now." She was quiet for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, "I'm scared." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Me too. But we'll figure it out. Together." The next day, he called a specialist, one of the best in the city, and scheduled an appointment under a foundation he'd quietly set up years ago for medical aid. He didn't tell her it was his foundation. He just said, "A donor heard about your work and wants to help cover treatment costs." She narrowed her eyes. "That's awfully convenient." "Sometimes good things happen when people pay attention," he said with a small smile. The treatment began the following week. Injections to slow the progression. High-dose vitamins, low vision aids. She hated the needles, hated feeling fragile, but she showed up every time. And he drove her, waited in the lobby, brought her favorite peppermint tea afterward. At the center, she adapted. She got a magnifying lamp for reading, large print books, and started using audio recordings for lesson prep. The kids didn't treat her any differently. If anything, they were more protective, offering to read aloud, fetching her glasses, making sure her chair was pulled in just right. One little girl, no older than 8, brought her a handmade card. On the front, in wobbly letters, "You see us even when we're hard to see." She cried that night. Not from sadness, but from being seen, truly seen for who she was. Not what she could or couldn't do. He found her on the porch, tissue in hand, moonlight washing over her face. "There's something else, aren't they?" he said, sitting beside her. "The best," she whispered. He looked out at the quiet street, then back at her. "You know, my mom used to say the world doesn't need more rich people. It needs more people who care," she smiled. "Sounds like she was wise." "She was," he said, "and I think she'd have liked you. I'd have liked her too." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after shared struggle and quiet trust. The road ahead wasn't easy. Treatments would continue. Vision might still fade, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of children's laughter and the promise of a space built on hope, the real miracle wasn't just healing eyes. It was two people choosing to walk through the dark together, hand in hand, believing that light could still be found. Even in the blur, the treatments helped at first. The injections slowed the blurriness, and the special glasses made reading possible again, though everything still looked a little softer around the edges, like a photograph left out in the rain. She adjusted. She always did. At the learning corner, she started using more audio tools, letting the kids read to her while she guided them with questions and gentle corrections. She memorized the layout of the room so well she could move through it without hesitation, even on days when the light was poor and her vision felt especially foggy. But then came the morning she couldn't find the coffee mug she used every day, the blue one with the chipped handle. She opened every cabinet, ran her fingers along the shelves, even checked the dishwasher twice. It wasn't until he walked in and said, "It's right here on the counter," that she realized she'd been standing 2 feet away from it the whole time. She didn't say anything, just nodded, poured her coffee, and sat down. But her hands shook. Later that week, during a reading session, a boy held up a book and asked, "What does this word say?" She leaned in, squinted, moved the page closer, then farther away. The letters swam. She couldn't make them out. Not clearly. She smiled anyway and said, "Let's sound it out together," and they did, but inside, panic fluttered like a trapped bird. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands as if they might hold answers. The truth was settling in, heavy and cold. The treatment wasn't stopping it. It was only slowing the fall. She didn't want to tell him. Not yet. He'd already done so much. Paid for doctors, driven her to appointments, rearranged his schedule just to be there. She didn't want to be another problem on his long list of responsibilities. So she kept quiet, smiled through the frustration, and pretended everything was fine, but he noticed. He always noticed. One rainy afternoon, while they were sorting book donations at the learning corner, she reached for a stack of paperbacks and knocked over a cup of pencils. They scattered across the floor. She dropped to her knees, feeling for them, her fingers fumbling. He knelt beside her, quietly picking them up one by one. "You don't have to do this," she said, voice tight. "Do what?" he asked gently. "Pretend I'm okay. Pretend you don't see what's happening." He stopped, looked at her. "I see you," he said. "Not your eyes, you." She swallowed hard. "It's getting worse." "I know," he said softly. "You shouldn't have to carry this too." "I'm not carrying it," he said. "We're walking through it together." She looked away, tears welling. "I taught kids to read for 30 years. What if I can't even see the words anymore?" "Then you'll teach them in new ways," he said. "You've already started. They don't need your eyes, they need your heart." "And that's still sharp as ever." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared I'll become a burden." "You could never be that," he said firmly. "You showed me how to be human again. If anything, I'm the one who owes you." She didn't argue, just nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. A few days later, he arranged a meeting with a low-vision specialist, not the same clinic, but a renowned center downtown that offered adaptive training, screen readers, voice-controlled devices, tactile tools for daily living. Again, he framed it as a program the foundation supports, but this time she didn't question it. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise not to hover." "I'll wait in the car," he said with a small smile. At the center, she met others like her, people learning to navigate a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. A retired mechanic who couldn't see his tools. A grandmother who struggled to recognize her grandchildren's faces. A young artist relearning how to create with sound and texture instead of color. For the first time, She didn't feel alone in her fear. She came home that evening quieter than usual, but with a new kind of resolve. That night over dinner she said, "I want to keep teaching, even if I can't see the board or the books the way I used to." "You will," he said. "We'll figure it out," and they did. A few people chuckled softly. Others leaned in. "I gave her my leftovers," he continued. "But what I didn't know was that she was about to give me back something far more valuable, my humanity." He paused, glanced at her. She nodded, eyes glistening. "She taught me that kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. Not their circumstances, not their struggles, but their worth." He went on to describe the learning corner, the listening classroom, the vision behind it, a place where kids who learn differently aren't labeled but lifted up. Where teachers like her, those who give everything even when the world doesn't notice, can keep making a difference. When he finished, the room clapped, not out of politeness, but genuine feeling. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stood and walked, slowly, confidently to the front. "I can't see all your faces," she said, her voice clear and strong, "but I can hear your hearts, and that's enough." She spoke about her students, how one boy who couldn't read now told stories so vivid they made the whole class laugh. How a quiet girl had started reading aloud after weeks of gentle encouragement. How learning wasn't about perfect eyesight or perfect test scores, but about connection, patience, and believing someone is worth your time. "Teaching," she said, "isn't something you do with your eyes. It's something you do with your soul." Afterward, people came up to thank her. A mother hugged her and whispered, "You saved my son's confidence." A retired teacher said, "I wish I'd known you when I was in the classroom." Even the reporter, notebook in hand, asked, "What's the one thing you want people to remember?" She thought for a moment. That no one is invisible. Not the person asking for leftovers in the rain. Not the child who struggles to read. Not the elder who's losing their sight. We all matter, and sometimes all it takes is one person choosing to stop and really look. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low, they sat together on the steps outside, sharing a thermos of tea. "You were amazing in there," he said. "I had good material," she teased. He smiled, then grew quiet. "I've been thinking, I'd like to make this official. Not just a program, but a foundation. Fund more classrooms like this in other neighborhoods. Hire teachers who've been overlooked. Support people like you, people who give everything but ask for nothing." She was silent for a long time. Then, "Only if it's not named after you." "Not me," he said. "After you." She shook her head. "No, call it something that means something, like the Seeing Heart Initiative, because that's what this is really about." He nodded. Perfect. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of kids laughing inside, the rustle of leaves, the hum of the city winding down. "You know," she said after a while, "I used to be afraid of going blind. Thought it would mean the end of everything I loved." "And now?" he asked. "Now I know it's just a different way of seeing," she said. "I hear more. I feel more. I notice the weight of a child's hand in mine, the warmth in a voice, the quiet courage in someone who shows up even when they're scared. That's real sight." He reached over and gently took her hand. "You've changed everything for me, for those kids, for this whole neighborhood." "No," she said softly. "We changed it together. And in that truth was the real miracle, not the money, not the classroom, not even the restored hope. It was the quiet, everyday choice two people made to care when it would have been easier to walk away. To trust when it would have been safer to stay guarded. To build something beautiful out of broken pieces. Weeks turned into months. The listening classroom thrived. More volunteers came. Local schools started referring students. A nearby university partnered with them to train future teachers in inclusive education. She still taught 3 days a week, her methods now studied by educators across the city. He stepped back from his company's day-to-day operations, shifting his focus to the foundation. He didn't announce it with fanfare. He just showed up, fixing leaky faucets at the center, driving kids home when parents were late, sitting with her during treatments, always with a thermos of tea and a quiet joke to lighten the mood. One evening, as they sat on the porch again, just like so many nights before, she turned toward him, even though she couldn't see his face. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked past me that night? She asked. He thought about it. I'd probably still be eating alone in fancy restaurants, wondering why nothing felt full. She smiled. And I'd still be out there in the rain, thinking no one sees me. But someone did, he said. And someone stayed, she replied. They didn't need grand declarations. Their story was already written, in the laughter of children who now believed in themselves, in the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to be defined by loss, in the heart of a man who learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you touch. The miracle wasn't a sudden cure or a dramatic twist. It was the slow, steady unfolding of kindness, planted in a rainy moment, watered with patience and grown into something that would outlive them both. And sometimes, that's enough. More than enough. It's everything.